Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Father Robert Spitzer.
That was a great one.
A copy of the book to Universal Principles is on the podium.
Okay, thank you.
Water is right here to your left.
Thank you. And what an honor it is to be with all of you today, and thank you for that most generous introduction, Camille, with all of the truthful and affectionate dimensions with my godchildren there. So in any case, I want to thank you for giving me such a warm welcome to South Dakota. Honestly, few places ever give me a welcome like this. So, since Amendment G has been mentioned a couple of times, and it is kind of on the national spotlight, what's going to happen here, and we're hoping that the backslide since the Dobbs decision will stop right here in this state. A primary tool for evangelization, and will sort of articulate the principles I'm going to be talking about today, is this book, 10 Universal Principles, which I know Camille has some copies of in the back for signing and for taking home. But we're begging you to be evangelizers, maybe take this material from today's talk and even from the book if you want to study it a little bit later, and just evangelize your friends, evangelize people that you think might just be on the cusp. Every little bit will help, I think, to turning this rising tide of pushing back on the great Dobbs decision, and let's make South Dakota one of the breaking moments in the history of the United States, where sanity really got introduced and light came back into the darkness. So, thank you. Let me just start off with two Jesuit rhetorical principles. And they're really classical rhetorical principles, but of course the Jesuits appropriated them without any indication that they came from Aristotle. The first one is the old saying, when you're in an argument with somebody, never deny, seldom affirm, always distinguish. Now, what does that mean? That means, when we're evangelizing a crowd out there, or we're trying to convince our children about something, or trying to do what Camille does through her educational endeavors and her website, it doesn't really pay to go, no, you're wrong, and drop it. Denial rarely produces anything except resentment if it's a blanket denial. Seldom affirm. You don't want to get so cozy with your opponent that you say, I just like to affirm everything that you believe in, even though you're directly opposed to it. The best thing to do is distinguish, to make a really good distinction, something that will allow a common ground with an opponent, yet at the same time make visible the distinction between your position and theirs. This is the great rhetorical gift, said Aristotle. This is the way to do to kind of bring opposition, into your camp by that common ground that you can legitimately build with them. And so that's the first principle I'll state. And in order to make those good distinctions, you need higher viewpoints. And so I'm going to give you a second principle, the principle of higher viewpoints. We could just call it the principle of principles, because this principle really is, what is a principle anyway? A principle is the bedrock. It's the foundation for truth in some way. It's when you get to the very bottom of every issue, there it is. These principles are there. They've been enshrined by every civilization that wanted to progress in humaneness, that wanted to progress in civility, that wanted to progress in honoring human persons, that wanted to progress in a kind of peaceful tranquility that honors the truth, not peace at the expense of the truth. And so this idea then of a principle, that bedrock foundation, like the principle of non-contradiction we'll talk about, that's really going to be very important. Why are principles so important? Why are these bedrock foundation things? Why are these higher viewpoints that allow us to make these distinctions? Because, of course, if we keep the argument, the rhetorical argument, just on the level of the issue of the day alone, and then we're just screaming at each other, throwing scripture quotes at each other, doing something else, and it's not going to make any progress. It's just going to stay right where it is. But if we can find a higher principle, something that people will agree with us on, that's so noble or so obvious or so high-minded, they'll say, yeah, I agree with that. Then we can use those principles in turn to prove our pro-life position. Now, when Camille teaches these courses in high school, and she's, has done these courses, normally when the class begins, about 50%, even in a Catholic school, 50% of the students are pro-choice. They're pro-abortion in the school. And 50%, that's a good, the bottle being half full, are pro-life. However, we have to acknowledge that there just are so many people out there who are very much pro-abortion in the classroom. But when she's finished talking about these 10 universal principles that I'll be talking about today, the essence of the programs and the curricula at Healing the Culture, then what she does is shifts from 50% pro-life to about 82 to 83% pro-life by the end of the course. That's an enormous shift. If you can get a 32% shift, and all of it is basically in favor of the pro-life position, this is the way to win young people over, because they're changing their minds. They're choosing differently. And what's the secret sauce for getting them to choose differently? Principles that they can agree on. So I'm going to be talking about 10 of these really quickly. I know I'm going to have to illustrate them very quickly. But I tell you, if we bring this into the high schools, if we start teaching these principles in the grade schools, as Camille is doing with Philo and Sophie there out there, if we can do that as early as possible, we can make the case. The pro-life position becomes so evident, it just illustrates that great saying, never deny, seldom affirm, always distinguish on the basis of these higher viewpoints, these principles that everyone can agree on. So let's start off. There are 3 principles that have to do with truth. It's been said almost to the point of being a cliche that, that truth is relative in our culture today. Yeah. I mean, our kids think so. You walk in and you just say to your kids in the classroom, hey, how many of you out there believe that everybody's opinion is about equally valid, because we should respect everybody's opinion? And when you see 50% of the class raise their hand, you just want to faint from the vantage point of, oh my gosh, where are we? And then 3 of the principles that we'll deal with concern the good, ethics. So we're going to have 3 ethical principles. And of course, we live in a culture where the good and ethics are floating, as Pope Benedict described it, floating in basically a sea of relativism, in moral relativism, the good. And of course, we've got a relativism with respect to justice. You say, how can justice be relativistic? Just wait. I can show you that justice can be adjusted so that it will come out in favor of whatever biased scheme we would like, unless we have principles to guide them. So 3 of those principles concern justice and the social order. And finally, the principle of beneficence, which stands all by itself, which we'll talk about later. All right, well, let's get to the principles of the truth. If you know young people, Start educating them now. Start going through this book with them now. Start trying to give it to them. Or get a curriculum or a program into the schools that your kids are attending that talks about these principles. Number one principle, the one that Aristotle, that every Jesuit school embraces, and every Catholic school should embrace from time immemorial. We need objective evidence. Subjective evidence as a ground of truth doesn't work at all, because subjectivity is not the objective truth. The objective truth is the one that we can all agree on. A subjective truth comes from me. And of course, it's my truth. And of course, I know today's mantra, right? Well, you have your truth and I have my truth. That is so contrary to the word truth, I don't have to tell any of you. It is just an abomination of the truth. The truth should be objective. The truth should be recognizable by all people. And so we want to ground our truths in what objective evidence can tell us. Science is based on empirical evidence that people can agree on, measurable evidence that people can agree on, repeatable data from experiments that people can agree on. That's a good mode of getting truth. Empirical evidence itself. There is a book in Spitzer's hand, should be obvious, except to Spitzer, who is blind, but everybody else can agree on it because it's empirically identifiable. And the same thing holds true for the principle of non-contradiction, which is our second principle, which I'll talk about later. But objective evidence should be the ground of every solid truth. Now, just to illustrate it for a second, today there's just no question that science has established that a fertilized zygote, that is to say a single-celled zygote, right after the moment of the union of the gametes, the very moment of fertilization there, we have a new, unique, and I'm going to talk about this in a moment, substantially whole human being. Now, a new, unique, substantially whole human being sounds to me like a human being. And of course, if it's substantially whole, there's nothing of substance that will be added to it later. Now, how does science establish this? Number one, at the stage of the single-celled zygote, you have a complete human genome that is there. This has been validated since 1976, going forward through genetic sequencing, DNA sequencers that have been utilized as common practice. Everyone knows this. Physicians know this for sure. And so the first thing to note is that genome contains all the information for what that human being will have as physical attributes. There will be some epigenomic phenomena that will occur throughout the stages of pregnancy and things of that nature. However, the essential characteristics and traits of the human being are there, completely whole. It's there. That zygote, that cell, this is, a totipotent cell. A totipotent cell just simply means it can become anything. Could become skin cells, could be bone cells, muscle cells, whatever. And so the totipotent cell is capable of generating, and here's the whole notion. It will generate. It's not just capable of generating. It will generate every single cell in a human body throughout the entire course of that human being's existence. Every one of them. And it will be the unity. That zygote will continue in existence to be the unity of all those cells that are being generated through it throughout the course of that human being's existence. So what you gonna add to the single-celled human zygote? All the information is there. Number two, every cell will be generated by it. Number three, the unity of all those cells throughout the course of that human being's lifetime are also there. You're never going to add anything substantive. Of course, you're going to add to the being accidentally. The human being will eat. And of course, the cells will multiply and get larger and more diverse. So there will be some additional nutriment that's added, and various environmental factors will bring into play, the warmth of the sun and a variety of other things that will add over there. But they're not substantial. They're just accidental features. All of the things that are necessary in order for that being to be uniquely human are there at the stage of a single-celled zygote. That's why today, when you do an international biological poll of, for example, 2,968 international biologists, 96% of them in that poll identified fertilization as the point at which a new, unique, substantially whole human being exists. In other words, it's a human being. And we're going to talk, And that's objective evidence, ladies and gentlemen. That is objective evidence. Why would the courts still honor? Because remember, Dobbs did not overturn the rationale, right? They turned the decision back to the states to determine, whether abortion would be legal in that state and at what stage it would be legal, back to the states. But we still have the further job of evangelizing people to say, you can't go around killing that human being. It's a substantially whole, new, unique human being, even though it hasn't been fully developed. If I give you some software and I say, I have put countless hours into developing this program, I have it now completed. It's on all these, huge disks that I'm going to load up onto my central processing unit. But it hasn't been loaded up yet, but all the programming is there to create this new machine that will do X, Y, Z, A, B, C, and I've poured my whole life into it.
15.
And then, of course, I smashed that. And the guy goes, what have you done? It's my lifetime's work. You didn't have it fully loaded onto the central processing unit yet. And so therefore, it really wasn't this super machine. You hadn't done it. You go, you're nuts. I'm suing you. Because it's a very real thing. So my point is clearly objective evidence. I better get going here. And number 2, the principle of non-contradiction, right? Something cannot both be and not be with respect to the same characteristic at the same place and time. For example, John cannot be both 6'2" and 6'3" in the same respect at the same place and time. You can go back and forth real fast, but you can't make them both true simultaneously in the same respect. Obviously, everybody holds to this, right? If you know some person who goes, I deny the principle of non-contradiction, I always say, I believe you. You just have to live that way. And of course, if you start living that way, you will soon be killed because the car, both does and doesn't exist as it's careening down at you on the road, et cetera, et cetera. You get the point. It's really going to be difficult to live without the principle of non-contradiction. All right. And why is it a principle? As Aristotle said in both the metaphysics and the posterior analytics, because if you deny it, you are forced to remain silent. You cannot make any statement that will possibly make sense if you're contradicting yourself. And in fact, when I first went to Harvard Div School, I had a professor, who came in one day and he says, X. The next day I came in, he goes, not X. So, of course, being a lad of curious nature, I said, well, wait a minute. Yesterday you said X. He goes, yes, I did. And today you said not X. How can you hold that? It's a contradiction. Yes, it is. I just packed up my books and I left the class and never returned. I mean, you know, what are you going to do? I mean, hello. I mean, this is Harvard students are going to take this. I don't know. I mean, maybe so. They obviously did. All right. So the third principle. Again, you know, kids are not going to deny it. The most complete explanation wins. Just to make a very long story short, Newton had a tremendously powerful and comprehensive explanation of the universe. But he left out three really significant facts, like the Michelson-Morley experiments of, you know, the untransgressible nature of light, you know, so that light travels at 186,200 miles per second, and it'll never get any faster or any slower, no matter what reference frame you have it in. And so this invariance of the speed of light becomes, of course, the relativity of length and motion within a system. Now, because Newton didn't take that into consideration, his system, as comprehensive as it was, basically could not describe reality correctly. The orbit, you know, of Mercury around the sun, a variety of other things. Einstein's equations totally predicted it correctly. Newton's did not. So we just, you know, can summarize it as saying, we have to account for the greatest amount of data. So, for example, with respect to, let's return to illustrate the principle of non-contradiction. You can't say in, like 15 cases that a preborn human being has the right to inherit, the right to sue, the right to elicit a prosecution from the state if somebody should, kill that preborn human being in utero, et cetera, and then turn right around and say that the preborn human beings have no rights under the law. Either they do or they don't. You can't have both. That's a contradiction. And why people don't point this out, I don't know. But anyway, I just leave it at that. Let's take the most comprehensive solution here. You know, I mean, anybody who has studied human beings for a long time, certainly as I and many other philosophers have, we know that there's a transcendent quality to every human being that needs to be taken into consideration, independent of the religion of a person or something of that nature. We manifest transcendence, not just in our desire for perfect truth, love, goodness, beauty, and being, but also, in our ability to have religious experiences and things of that nature. But now today, from peer-reviewed medical studies of near-death experiences, and I talk about this in detail and other things, it is very clear, right? The New York Academy of Sciences 2 years ago in 2022 declared in their annals, on the basis of peer-reviewed medical studies of near-death experiences, that there is a very credible likelihood that your soul, that your consciousness will survive, they didn't use the word soul, that your consciousness will survive bodily death. The New York Academy of Sciences? Hardly a group beating a religious drum. All I can tell you is maybe there is a strong likelihood of consciousness surviving bodily death. And if that is the case, then we ought to admit that this being, this single-celled being, already has something transcendent, something transmaterial, something transphysical, something that can survive the death of the body in which it inheres, that it will survive even after bodily death, and it will survive with its own kind of transcendent body. Those of you who are at my Wonder Conference, the two of you that were there will understand this from my talk last week. I mean, it's pretty clear that this is actually the case on the basis of good, objective, scientific evidence and peer-reviewed studies. Shouldn't we say then that this is, the idea of this is just a clump of cells? We should be outraged. Well, it is cells, yes, but it is a unity of cells. It is a self-directed unity of cells. And it possesses, as far as the New York Academy of Sciences is concerned, some form of consciousness that can survive bodily death. I'm a religious person. I call it a soul. You don't have to call it a soul. You can call it a transcendent self. You can call it transcendent consciousness. You can call it whatever you wish, but it's there, and it's inhering even a single-celled zygote. That is a being of tremendous worth. It is a being of transcendence. It's a being that can be creative. It's a being that has the apparatus already present to it to desire perfect truth, love, goodness, beauty, and home. We ought to consider that when we're going to go and sanction the killing of preborn human beings. Just saying. Because, of course, guess what? If that being has a soul, you know what? Maybe you had to have a transcendent being to create it. Maybe we ought to consider it. Just saying, independent of any of our religious holdings, just a thought from science. And by the way, when I present that stuff to kids, to 14, 15, 16-year-old kids, when they, for example, they take our course in the Catholic faith and science or something, when they see that evidence from near-death experiences, I mean, they are so stunned by 80% of blind people seeing for the first time when they're clinically dead, flat EEG, fixed and dilated pupils. They go, no way. And we go, way. I mean, for sure, this is what's actually happening. And so, but they are very much shocked by it, and they're beginning to think, maybe I am more than a clump of chemicals. Maybe I am more than atoms and molecules. Do you think? The evidence now from science is so prolific and so well established. I think we can say that that's part of the definition. The most comprehensive definition of a human being ought to consider this element of a consciousness which can survive bodily death. Call it a soul, call it what you will. We are becoming progressively more evidenced by science to be made in the image and likeness of God. Stop it right there. Okay, so these three principles, complete explanation, no contradictions, and objective evidence, you put them together, the case for pro-life and the case for the transcendence of that human being is just so evident. I think we ought to consider it. I think we need to present that again. We need to get out of this relativism of truth and come back to our senses, where we had good old Aristotle to guide us and say, this sounds like three really good principles we can all agree on. And by the way, most people will agree on them. And if people say, I don't want the most comprehensive explanation, I say, okay, good. You choose the explanation that doesn't account for half the data, and you keep living life like that. Go ahead. It's not my problem. I say the same thing. You want to believe in contradictions? Great. You go ahead and live like that. Go ahead. That's fine by me. It's your problem, not mine. You don't want objective evidence? You just want subjective evidence all to yourself? Well, just wait until the subjective evidence turns against you, because of course somebody has more influence than you, or somebody is wealthier than you. Go ahead, live that way. It's your problem, not mine. They get it. Let me tell you, they get it. Okay, let's turn to the three principles of the good. Now, of course, I'm a little bit more explicit here than we take this in a slower way, and we're more helpful when we talk to the students. I'm giving you the blunt treatment, but in any case, let's go to the second set of principles that concern the good, or ethics. I think, just about everyone believes in the principle of non-maleficence. That's just a fancy way of saying, don't do any unnecessary harm. It is the grounding principle of all ethics. It's the silver rule, right? The silver rule is the one with the knots. The golden rule is the one without. Do not do unto others what you would not have them do unto you. Don't do a harm to others that you don't want done to you. If a harm is going to be inevitable, minimize it. But if it's unnecessary or it can be avoided, avoid it. It's the principle of all ethical principles. And by the way, if someone should come up to you and go, gee, I really need to do unnecessary harms to people in order to be fulfilled in life. My advice is run, Bambi, run. Because, of course, at this juncture, and the kids get it. Of course they go, yeah, I don't think I want to have a friend that wants to do unnecessary harms to me in order to be fulfilled. He could be a sadist. No, do you think? And so there's the thing. Well, wait a minute now. Let's just get to the pro-life issue for just a second. Is it ever necessary to do a harm to your fetus? Really necessary, an unavoidable harm to kill your own baby? I cannot really think of one. Of course, some people will say, well, what about rape? What about incest, et cetera, et cetera? Let's take the hard questions and put them aside for just 1 second and just say, in general, what do you think? Independent of the very minimal number of special conditions and hard questions that you can raise. What do you think? Should we be doing unnecessary harms to a preborn human being or not? And if you want to say yes, then note this: you violate the principle. And if you violate the principle for one thing, you violate the principle for them all. You open the Pandora's box in one issue and say unnecessary harms can be done to this group, then wait a while and you will see that the slippery slope is always inevitable. You open that Pandora's box, you violate the principle, you violate this foundational piece of order that grounds all ethics, and you will shake the entire building. Because all of those other things are dependent on that foundation. And so you break that foundation, you're not going to break it just for the preborn. It's going to be broken then for the elderly. And then they're going to turn to infanticide. And we've seen this already. And then they're going to start, asking people to sort of justify their own existence by what they can contribute. And of course, eventually they're going to start doing the old Peter Singer method of 30 minutes. Of the Peter Singer method of telling people well, you can go ahead and start thinking about killing people who kind of cost society a lot of money, And by the way, he included on that list blind people. I'm just saying I took personal resentment to that one. But anyway, so I'll just say this in a nutshell. You cannot shake the the foundation of ethics, which is this principle of non-maleficence, and come out with a society that's worth living in, period. Let's take the second principle. And the second principle of ethics that's really important is the end does not justify the means. Comes from St. Augustine. By the way, Aristotle gave rise to the first three principles. Every religion in the world gives rise to the principle of non-maleficence. There's no disagreement there. Of course, Christianity at the forefront because we have the golden rule, and I'll talk about that with the principle of beneficence later. But right now, for the time being, let's go to this second principle, which is really important. You can't use an evil means to get to a good end. You can't use an unjust means to try and get to a just end. This never works out well. Remember the old Maoists, well, we're going to do this cultural revolution. We need to jack up the economy there of China. So, all right, maybe 6, 7, 8 million people, maybe more will have to die. And then maybe another, 300 million will be subjected to poverty. But in the end, it's going to be great for China because the economy is going to be much stronger in the end. Pol Pot, the same thing. Well, we're going to bring everybody back to the land, to the farming, to the agrarian nature, clear out the cities and the complex societies, et cetera, et cetera. Every time somebody comes up with an idea that you can use evil means to get to a good end, it always winds up backfiring. And there's a very good reason for it. Frequently, by using evil means to get to a good end, you create more evil than the good you will ever be able to portend doing. So, for example, you can say, well, let's invite Father Spitzer to his last dinner. And let's make sure that there is a little bit of imperceptible poison that's introduced into his food at the dinner tonight. Now let's go around the room here and let's buy an insurance policy collectively on it. But it's only for good purposes. So we're going to give to this school, we're going to give to this hospital, we're going to give to this church. So all the proceeds that we'll get, we'll just skim a little off the top, but not much more than that. But basically we're going to do this for really good reasons. And for all of this good that we're going to get, all we got to do is make Spitzer die prematurely and lie to the insurance companies. It's not going to work. Because at the end, of course, it's not just going to be the good that, of course, is tainted. It's going to be the evil that comes into the world in its place. Maoism, Stalinism, fascism in Germany, Nazism, it was never any good. The promises were there of great good, but the means that was used were so evil that it cast the world, cast these regions and countries into abject terror. Augustine anticipated it a long time ago. You have to make sure. Now, I don't have to tell you the same thing with the pro-life issue. You can say whatever you want. I got to kill my baby because, I have this end that I need. I need to go on for my college career. Or, I just can't spare another 6 months of pregnancy to give the baby up for adoption. I've got these other motives. They're all good reasons. They're all really, really, really good reasons why I got to kill the baby. But you know what? At the end of the day, killing the baby is a real evil that cannot be justified in terms of whatever good end we may want from it. And once we get the kids right, the first thing we do before we ever bring out and apply these principles, is what we're doing with the kids is we're getting them to agree to the principle. Don't you think that the ends and means, I guess so. Don't you think the principle of non-maleficence, right, that this is, that we ought to be respecting this principle? I think this we should respect it and so forth. Okay, let's go on to this third principle, which is the universality of personhood. And you say to yourself, well, why is that principle so important in the preservation of the good? The idea, personhood is a very, very important term. It really, almost in a sense, you could say it's, in the minds of many lawmakers, tantamount to legal personhood. Right? Or does a person have rights or not? Or does a human being have rights or not? Since the founding of this country in the Declaration of Independence, since the founding of this country, we have said, yes, everyone has the inalienable rights to life and liberty. That means self-governance and the pursuit of happiness. That is to say, to make a better life for themselves, to advance themselves and their families to the best extent that they can, so long as they do not violate the rights of others. We've always held this. And we said that it was a right that belonged to human beings by their very nature. So what is an inalienable right? An inalienable right is what you need in order to live and be, to act like and be a human being. A human being is living. A human being has self-governance. And a human being has freedom and creativity to make not only a better life for himself and his family and herself and her family, but also to make a better life for the culture around them. That's the normal thing. As long as we're not violating human, we need that to be human. That's who human beings are. We're free, we're creative, we're self-governing, we're alive. And of course, we can't be a human being without having that self-governance, without having that ability to create and to act freely within society, to have life itself. We can't do it. We call it an inalienable right, and we'll talk about those inalienable rights in just a moment in another principle. But here's the deal. We all have to agree on one thing, that every human being, every single one of them, has to have those, they possess those inalienable rights by their very nature. They are persons. And so the first thing that we want to recognize is that you can't go around distinguishing between a human being on the one hand and a person that has legal rights on the other, whose right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, a better life, that is dependent somehow on the approbation of a state. We have to say either we all have this right by our very nature. We all need to live, to be self-governing, and have, live in a condition where we can pursue a better life for ourselves through our creativity and efforts, right? We either agree to this, that this is what we need to be and act as humans for everyone, because it's the same thing. If you violate it once, you're going to violate the foundation itself. This is a principle. Right? Personhood belongs to every human being. And that word every is so important. The minute you separate, how did we start chattel slavery? How did we turn human beings into mere movable property to be determined by other human beings? How did we do that? We did it because we said, aha, yes, that's a human being over there. It's a black human being, yes, but in the case of black human beings, or in the case of Indian human beings, well, they don't have rights, inalienable rights to liberty and self-governance. But every other human being does. Well, the minute you start making those kinds of distinctions, of course, where are you going to stop? Who's going to determine where you're going to stop? So 5'6" human, too short, sorry, you don't have inalienable rights for life or liberty. We've just made this determination. It either belongs to everybody, or somebody's going to have to determine where the dividing line is between human beings that are persons and guaranteed rights under the law, and human beings that are not person and are not guaranteed rights under the law. In other words, we can sanction their killing or their enslavement. And this is what happened in Dred Scott versus Sanford. It's also what happened in Roe versus Wade. And it's still out there because it's up to the states now to determine what the abortion law will be. We just have to keep insisting, though. We have to keep going back to the principle. Either personhood belongs to every human being, and as I just said earlier, the objective evidence from science shows that every single solitary human being, right, has personhood. Every human being should have personhood, because we are not going to make a single exception, because to make one exception is to kill the foundation. To kill the foundation is to lead to the slippery slope of multiple violations of the principle. And of course, then where will we create the dividing line? Oh, I'm sorry, your gross income this year was only $30,000. You're under the limit. Sorry, we can now enslave you and at least reduce you to indentured servitude because of your problematic economic being. You could do it. There's nothing in the law. If you need an explicit law to prevent economic means being used to deny your personhood and therefore to deny you the inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, let me tell you, it's going to be brutish, ugly, and short out there in civil society. And we are teetering on that edge. All this assisted suicide stuff where you put pressure on people, that's a whole other issue that I won't get into today. But all these principles apply, every last one of them. Either every human being is a person, or if you make one exception, then every human being is not a person. And who is to determine it? And whoever gets to determine it, why, they have the immense power of God. And they do not deserve it. Just leave it at that. Can I get kids to agree on this? Yes, I can. I don't tell them anything about how this affects the pro-life issues. I just tell them, how about this principle? This Dred Scott decision. Do you like that fact, that little exception was made? That we can say that some people are persons Some human beings are persons, but some human beings are not persons under the law. That's what they did in 1681 in Virginia. That's what they declared in Dred Scott versus Sanford, prior to the Civil War. That's what they basically decided. The Supreme Court in Dred Scott versus Sanford unanimously decided that you could subjugate black people to the dominant, to the superior race. That's right there enshrined in our constitutional law. There it is. All I'm saying is the younger people go, well, I don't like that. Let's just keep this in mind when we start talking about the pro-life issue, because you agreed with the principle, and the principle is the bedrock. You make exceptions to the principle, you crush the foundation, and all of the rest of the pillars that are resting on that foundation start teetering. But I digress. Let me get to 3 principles of justice. We already talked about the first principle. We already know there is the principle of inalienable rights. By the way, this came from a Catholic too, from a Jesuit, I might point out. Father Francisco Suarez in the School of Salamanca did publish, the inalienable rights to life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. So there were actually 4 inalienable rights for Suarez. Locke chooses life, liberty, and property when he puts it in the Second Treatise on Government. And Jefferson chooses life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. But anyway, it comes down to us, and it becomes not just the foundation for our Declaration of Independence, but it also becomes the foundation for the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights. Why is this principle of inalienable rights so important? Why did Hugo Grotius, the father of international law, embrace it? Why did John Locke, the father of political theory in the Western world, why did he embrace it? Why did Thomas Jefferson, our founding father, and Benjamin Franklin embrace it? And why did the UN Declaration of Human Rights embrace it? For the very simple reason that you could not eliminate these rights of human beings. No state could violate them, because these rights are needed in order for people to act like and be human beings. To take away a human being's right to act like and be a human being is literally the most unjust thing you can do. It's an injustice. Okay, I'm going to wind her up here. But the main thing to remember here is it's an injustice beyond belief. And that injustice, to prevent it in the future, Locke said, we have to hold true to these inalienable rights. Anybody ever wonder why inalienable rights are not mentioned in our Constitution, in our Bill of Rights? Why aren't life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness there? Because the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are declared rights. They're extrinsic rights. They're rights given to us by the polity. They're rights given to us by the state. And our founding fathers, they were really smart. They thought, I don't want to put that there. Because if I put that there and give the state the right to declare the inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, if I let them declare that into existence, then they could take it away in the future. Because if they declared it into existence, they can rescind them. But not so. You cannot rescind the inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, because no state ever declared them. What does Jefferson say in the Declaration of Independence? We hold these truths to be self-evident. There it is. No state has to declare them. We know this to be self-evident by our own intuition, that every human being is created equal and has the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay. Enough said. Our founding fathers were really smart. The only time that these things appear in the 14th Amendment. And in the 14th Amendment, it just says, no state shall violate the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So it's defending those inalienable rights against any state law by mandate of the fact that they are self-evident. Okay, let's take the second thing, the prioritization of rights. Since the time when inalienable rights, by the way, I can get kids to agree on this. They agree on those inalienable rights. They agree that no one has the right to take them away. So that must mean if every single human being is a person, then every single solitary pre-born human being has the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now we get into the whole thing of the prioritization of rights. Why is this so important? Why do we have to determine this for the kids? It's so important because what we're dealing with is, when we're talking about inalienable rights, is a rights conflict. Remember how this was originally put right after the Roe v. Wade decision. It is a woman's right to choose versus the preborn human being's right to life. Now, a lot of people say, see, the woman, she's an adult, she's visible, she's got lots of things. Those preborn human beings, why, they're small compared to big grown-up women. And so the woman's right should, of course, invalidate the right of the preborn human being, and for all kinds of other reasons and so forth and so on. What did our founding fathers say? What did Hugo Grotius say? What did Francisco Suarez say? What did the whole philosophy of law say before Roe v. Wade? They said, no way. The right to life has to be higher than the right to liberty and the mother's custody of her own body. And the right to liberty has to be higher than the right to property. Why is that? It's called the necessity criterion. Objectivity, ladies and gentlemen. Objective evidence. Because the right to life is objectively necessary for the right to liberty. In other words, the right to liberty is objectively necessary for the right to property. It has to be in that order. Hey, if you're dead, your liberty rights are a moot question. Obviously, your liberty rights depend on your right to life. It depends on, it's necessary that you be living. You get the point. The same thing with the property rights, right? When in Dred Scott versus Sanford, right, when the Supreme Court unanimously said that the black person could be subordinated to the dominant superior race, the white race, they said that because they thought that the property rights of white people were higher than the liberty rights of black people. But of course, when you think about it for just a second, in the objective ordering of things, I can say, hey, you can own all the property you want, but I get to own you. So de facto, I own your property too. Therefore, property rights really do depend on your liberty rights. And that is the point. So why put the objective ordering of rights out there? And by the way, we get the kids to agree on it. Just get them to agree on that principle. Yeah, that right to life, it's kind of important for the right to liberty. The right to liberty is important for the right to property. We want to avoid slavery in the future. Well, here we go again, violating a principle. And all I can tell you right now is, when you look at that Roe v. Wade decision and you just take the students through the decision itself, remember, Dobbs puts this back to the states. What we have to do now is show them that it is really, truly unjust to say that a mother's right to liberty, custody over her own body, it is unjust to prioritize that over the preborn human being's right to life. That preborn human being has that right to life because that right to life has to extend to a preborn human being who is established as a substantially whole, new, unique human being. And of course, every single human being, substantially whole human being, must be accorded rights lest we crush that principle. So, of course, eventually you can see how the kids are getting backed into the corner, backed into the corner, backed into the corner, and then you just go, fiat, hey, you guys are all pro-life. You agree to these principles, and here's why you're pro-life. And, of course, you can see why Camille's curriculum program can actually shift that 50% pro-life to an 82, 83% pro-life, just on the basis of going back to the principles. Never deny, seldom affirm, always distinguish. Always go to the higher viewpoint. Don't argue just on the issue. Go from the issue to the principles and the higher viewpoints, then come back to the issues again. If we do that, we can save our civilization We can save the kinds of atrocities. We can convince reasonable young people. Yeah, there's always going to be, who was the commentator the other day who said, well, when you think about it, and you put all the facts together, you got to say that unborn human being is a human being. I agree. But in this case, I just don't care. There's always going to be somebody like that. Who was that guy, Bill Maher or whatever? Yeah, Bill Maher. Yeah. I got to tell you, you just don't care. Holy mackerel! Just go ahead and put the dynamite cords to the electrical voltage and just shut down the plunger, because you're just blowing up civilization. It's not just your personal decision. The whole polity is dependent upon this. My gosh, if we can't get agreement on these 10 universal principles, it's all over. I'll just spend a couple of minutes. I'm not going to talk about the ninth principle, which is really the limits of human freedom. But here's how John Locke presented it. My right to swing my fist ends where your fist of a face begins. So in other words, you can't violate the rights of others in order to get, in the free use of your rights. That's not a proper use of rights, and you can be punished for that. But that's a whole other story, which I'm not going to explain. But kids will agree to it. They'll agree that their right to freedom is not, complete. It's not universal. There have to be limits, and the limits are the rights of other human beings. And finally, the principle of beneficence, which is a big, long story, which is really, really important. It gets to these 4 levels of happiness, which are the real conversion of the heart. This is a truly important principle. But the main thing to do is we need to bring our kids. Our society today is level 1 and level 2. Now, what's level 1? That's materialistic and pleasure happiness. What's level 2? That's ego comparative happiness. Who's achieving more? Who's achieving less? Who's got more power? Who's got less power? Who's more intelligent? Who's less intelligent? And if it's me, yay! And if it's you, not yay. And of course, the point is pretty clearly we're in a competition all the time. But the main thing is we can't make our identity dependent on just being the best, on being the better. Right? Because what winds up happening, and we go through this with the kids, is if you really make level 2 your most important identity, that's what you're living for. You're not living to do the good for others. That's level 3. That's contributive happiness. You're not living to be with God and to try and do God's purpose and His ultimacy, in the world. That's level 4. That's faith-based happiness. If you don't have level 3 happiness and level 4 happiness, something to do with God and something to do with the good for others, the contributive happiness, then what winds up happening is level 2 by default becomes the dominant urge and drive of all the people out there. Well, you can just imagine all these people, who's achieving more, who's achieving less, who's more intelligent, who's less intelligent, et cetera, living to be comparatively the best and stoking it up with Instagram, stoking it up. And what can you expect to happen in our culture? You can expect 3 things to happen. Antisocial aggressivity is going to go through the ceiling. I rest my case, every single poll, right? All the homicide rates that are going up, all of the bullying that's going on, on the internet, the Instagram and so forth and so on, the suicide rates from bullying just going through the ceilings, right? I don't have to tell you. Just look at the major depressive disorder. Since we've got level 2 right at the forefront, and we've increased the Instagram, social media, TikTok use, whatever. We put it, there to the kids. Major depressive disorder, that's bad, has doubled in 10 years from 8% of our young people's population between 13 and 25, 8% to 16%. Normal continuative depression, I don't know what, but the continuative depression, that has increased all the way to 36% of our young people. Major depressive, 16%. It's abysmal. And it's 2 factors, I'm telling you right now. First of all, the lack of religion. Since the American Psychiatric Association correlated Religion with Happiness in 2004 in a major study done by Kanita Dervik and many other psychiatrists. And the main thing that they discovered is non-religiously affiliated people, those who would be considered nuns on the Pew Survey, N-O-N-E-S, on the Pew Survey. Those nuns, essentially, they have much higher rates. So we're talking about doubling and tripling of depression. We're seeing that. Anxiety. We're seeing that. Certainly substance abuse, familial tensions, antisocial aggressivity. We're seeing that. Suicides and suicidal contemplation. We're seeing that because, of course, of the doubling of the suicide rates among young girls and the almost over 2/3 increase in suicide rates of young people overall. All I can tell you is this is really terrible stuff that's going on. But it's correlatable with the decline of religion, the decline of an absolute mooring, and it is correlatable with the increase of level 2 happiness, eco-comparative happiness, along with the stoking of it from Instagram and social media, etc. You put those two things together, it's a catastrophic, trifecta that's coming, along with the destabilization of the family. You put those three things together, and that trifecta is bad. And our culture is embraced by it. But you know what? If we restore these 10 principles, there's a starter. And if we can get back to convincing kids to move to level 3 and level 4 instead of level 1 and level 2, to tell them that their very happiness depends on them getting to contributive happiness and to transcendent or faith-based happiness. If we can demonstrate it, and we have the sociological, from secular surveys, university surveys, surveys from the archives of general psychiatry, we have this in the hand right now. And with all this in place, what I'd want to say is that if we can convince these young people, move to level 3 and 4, they're going to have better families. They're going to have a much more stable human existence. These families are going to be much better for the children of the next generation. These people are going to build a civilization and leave a legacy of goodness that cannot be imagined. But if we don't get them there, if we leave them at level 1 and level 2, if we allow them to violate these great principles of civilization and civility in our culture, if we don't even teach them these principles, if we don't even teach them the distinction between levels 1 and 2 on the one hand and levels 3 and 4 on the other, if we just leave them to be as they are, then I tell you this right now, it's going to be one tough, brutish, ugly, and short culture that we're going to create for them. But it's not us who are creating. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I'm preaching to the choir because we need your help. I'm going to wrap up. I'll just say this. Let's just bring this back into our culture. Let's just give the evidence that we can. I've written a whole lot of books on the evidence for God, and many of them are accessible to high school students. But what I'd like you to do is really consider Camille's program. Really consider, if you know high schools or grade schools, middle schools that could use this kind of education, this principle-based education that then applies it to the pro-life issues, that talks about the 4 levels of happiness. Camille's program is very good for that. Above all, I'm asking you to do 2 things today too. Please support her generously with her efforts to bring these into as many schools, grade schools and high schools as possible. And of course, please, everything you can to evangelize your friends using these principles and anything else to get that Amendment G. Let's just get that thing. Let's put the stoplight there, and let's make South Dakota one of the first in the nation to start turning the tide of this monstrous kind of disregard for life and coming back to sanity. Thank you so very, very much for your kind attention today.